Good evening and welcome to another episode of A Closer Look. All government statutory bodies and authorities will now be required to remit all funds they collect back to the government purse into a consolidated revenue fund. Secretary for Finance Ken Nangan revealed this during a workshop on the implementation of new Non-Tax Revenue Administration Act. Lindy Suharupa with the details.
Departmental heads and representatives from various government organizations, including NACIA, National Fisheries Authority, NICTA, and all other government entities, met at the APEC House in Port Moresby last week for a very important consultative workshop on the implementation of the Non-Tax Revenue Administration Act. Secretary for Finance Ken Nangan talks more on this act.
The act requires that all state statutory authorities and statutory bodies collecting revenue on behalf of the state. The law now requires that all the revenues collected are now remitted into the Consolidated Revenue Fund. The reason being that government wants to broaden the tax base.
The bill on the implementation of this act was tabled in Parliament in 2022 and is ready for implementation as of the 8th of May 2023. Secretary for Finance Ken Nangan explained that the country only relies on tax revenues collected by IRC. However, there is sufficient non-tax revenue that is being generated by government entities but are kept for their own functions and operations. Secretary Nangan explained that there have been a lot of entities created by an Act of Parliament to perform certain regulatory functions on behalf of the state. In performing those regulatory functions, they collect revenues, which are public monies.
We have so much non-tax revenue. There have been a lot of bodies that have been created by an Act of Parliament to perform certain regulatory functions on behalf of the state. In performing those regulatory functions, they collect revenues, and those revenues are public monies. Before the Act, the revenues have been kept by the agencies themselves, and then they use their own planning process, own spending programs without the money coming into the national budget process. The Act now requires them to remit all the monies that were collected in performing that government state regulatory function into the government corpus, the Consolidated Revenue Fund. The Act now requires that all the monies, we recognize that they are now public monies. All public monies by law, especially the Public Public Finance Management Act, they must now go into consolidated revenue. We are now explaining to the statutory public and statutory bodies on how to access funds, because from now on the funds will no longer be kept by them. They will now come into the Consolidated Revenue Fund.
The Consolidated Revenue Fund is simply referring to the government purse at Waigani. The Non-Tax Revenue Administration Act will now enable all these monies collected by government entities to be collected and placed in the Consolidated Revenue Fund for government use. Secretary Nangan says this is to broaden the government's budget to cater for national projects like roads and bridges, health and education services, and law and order and development infrastructures, essentially to fund service delivery nationwide.
All monies collected will now go in the common basket, and the activities, the national priority programs, that gets determined through the national budget process. The benefit of local Papua-New-Guineans is that we will have more monies now available. Monies that have been kept outside of the budget process will now be brought into the public scrutiny, and it will be used to fund the national budget. So which means that in terms of health services, education services, all the government programs will now have more money which are no longer available in the system. So that will help the government implement its national priorities.
There were certain concerns raised during the consultative workshop. However, Secretary Ngangan assured the departmental heads that an interim committee has been set up to deal with all queries, as this is the interim stage of this act. As the Non-Tax Revenue Administration Act comes into play, and with the government now having an upper hand in controlling both government taxes and non-government taxes from the national purse at Waigani, will vital services like health and education, roads and bridges, law and order, and other development infrastructures reach the most rural parts of the country? Only time will tell.
We take a quick break now, and when we return, we highlight the launching of a solar-powered computer lab for Kikori Secondary School in Gulf Province. Welcome back to a closer look. Access to information and communication technology is a big challenge for rural schools, for both the teachers and students. Kikori Secondary School in the Gulf Province was the proud recipient of a solar-powered computer lab, all thanks to the Mineral Resources Development Company, or MRDC. Esther Gane with more on this story.
Students at the Kikori Secondary School in the Gulf Province now have access to a modern computer laboratory equipped with e-library facilities that will greatly enhance learning. The computer laboratory is the first of its kind to be built in the area. It is a modern, fully furnished building equipped with 24 computers and one teacher workstation. The laboratory, the computers, and its server are powered by a new 15-kilowatt solar power system that will provide power 24 hours a day. As the system is not wide area network, the students are protected from harmful internet materials and their security online is guaranteed. The project was delivered by Mineral Resources Development Company and its subsidiary the PNG LNG Gas Resource Pipeline Limited, or Segment 7, at a cost of 1.18 million kina. This cost includes the classroom, the computers, local area network systems, and solar-powered systems. Mr. Mano has visited the school in 2020 at the height of the COVID-19 outbreak and learned firsthand the many needs of the school. He decided there and then that the best help for the students would be a modern facility to enhance learning.
Last year when I saw the results from Kikori High School compared to the rest of Papua New Guinea, it was very, very sad because it was right down at the bottom. And I asked myself the question, what have I done? What can I do? What can we do to make sure that we don't leave the people of Kikori behind, but they must catch up with the rest of the country?
He says the only way to bring changes to the remote areas is to educate the young generation, and a similar facility would be built in schools in the PNG LNG project footprint areas.
We will invest about 7.8 million under our 30%. In the PNG LNG, we get 2% of royalty, 2% of equity. 40% we spend to the landowners as part of their dividends. But that 30% from our contribution, you're supposed to get it as royalty and equity. That is the money that we will invest. We'll start all the primary school, Kayam, Kopi, Baina, Vaira, Babaguna, BC, Gore, and Omati. That 7.8 million will be used to build double classroom and classroom. So your primary schools are equipped so that they fit into Kikori High School.
With this facility set up, Mr. Mano wants to see Kikori Secondary School in the top 5 within the next 2 to 5 years' time.
And the people must not be left behind. And the only way we can do justice to the people of Kikori is to educate the young generation so that they are prepared for these changes. If those of us in position of responsibility, position of power, if we cannot do this, we have failed in our duty. That is why last year we did an ambitious plan to educate the mass of people of Kikori. And remember, MRDC's team is we leave no one behind in education.
Kikori Secondary School is located in one of the project-impacted areas with a total of 250 students and 15 teachers. Gas Resources Pipeline or Segment 7 Director Wauro Omambe was proud that the facility, the first of its kind in the area, was delivered for students in Kikori. He wants this facility to be set up as he wants the students to cope up with the schools in the cities when it comes to accessing materials online that would help in their studies.
I saw a need that. I told MRDC that I want this facility to be established in Kikori so that our students have equal footings with other students throughout the country. Like students coming out of Port Moresby International School or Gordon Secondary must have an equal footings. Not only in the country, but have a equal footings with those in developed countries as well. I'd like to challenge you students. This is a first time state-of-the-art facilities that we have established for you. Make use of these facilities. When you are here, make use of these facilities. I see many of our students roaming around the streets, carrying boombox and doing other silly stuff. Don't do that. This is very important now. This is your life. This is your life. Use these facilities to the fullest.
The director thanked MRDC for fulfilling their goal of leaving no one behind. Mr. Omambe urged the school students to make use of the facilities and look after them. The school principal, Uelki Uamo, stressed that this new facility will have a positive impact in the teaching and learning of students and teachers at Kikori.
Students we have here in front of us are our leaders for tomorrow. While we acknowledge the benefits of the oil we have, the gas we have, the timber we have, the most important resources are the human resources. It is people who will change our communities. And these are the very people we're talking about. These are the agents of change in our communities. And therefore, I would once again like to appreciate MRDC for putting our facilities up here.
The school head boy Fian Moroivi also thanked MRDC for this facility on behalf of the students and challenged the parents to teach their children when they are still at primary level before they make it into Kikori Secondary School.
I would like to thank MRDC for at least give us this opportunity to have access to internet and at least make our education much more easier.
The e-library can be accessed by the students and their teachers through a local area network that was installed. Learning materials for all the subjects taught are available, including popular reading and educational books.
After the break, we bring you a segment on the recently concluded Special Economic Zone Summit, which was held in Port Moresby. Stay tuned for that. You're watching A Closer Look. Papua New Guinea for the first time played host to the Special Economic Zone Summit, which concluded recently. Participants flew in both domestically and internationally to partake in the summit. Grace Papiali attended this summit and brings you this story.
Papua New Guinea hosted its first ever International Special Economic Zone Summit in Port Moresby on the 8th to the 9th of May 2023. This summit alone housed invited international speakers from countries like Japan, Bangladesh, India, Philippines, and China. The official opening night was on Sunday, the 7th of May, by Prime Minister James Marape.
Minister Maru, you will have our full support. We'll give you full support in all programs that you have identified. We'll work with you to ensure that SEZ becomes the anchor and impetus and focal point of our economic diversification and strengthening focus we are embarking upon.
Minister for International Trade and Investment Richard Maru explained the PNG Special Economic Zone.
Just for the record, Papua New Guinea started its first SME endeavor when it enacted the ICDC Act in 1993 and started the first industrial park in Leh called Malahan. He then moved on to East Nubitan and started the Ulavio Industrial Park. He then enacted legislation to start the Wanimo Free Trade Zone. And then enacted legislation, not legislation, it passed policy to start the PMIZ in Medang. And then recently, it enacted legislation and established the Konebada Petroleum Park. These are all forms of SEZ. We've been at it now for 30 years. But the question is, where have we got to?
The summit provided the answers they needed to shift the SEZ project on a better course. He alluded on the reasons of the closure of these SEZs, the reason as to why they were a failure.
We didn't provide a gas in Konibara. There's no park there. There's no free trade zone in Wanimo. Balahan, we have it now fully located, just breaking even. And ICDC, the industrial park in Ulaveo, we put up some residential houses and just left it to it. So as a country, we need to take stock. We have been at it for 30 years and have virtually failed as a country and as a nation and as leaders.
On the first day of the summit, Japan Development Institute chairman and the mastermind behind the assessment of PNG SEZs in the country, Dr. Shoichi Kobayashi, defined the SEZs and said that in order for SEZs to work, the first step is proper land evaluation. He said SEZs that are to be developed in PNG must be able to compete globally.
We talk about the potentiality of SEZ in agro, forestry, possibly fishery, and those areas we have to move forward to create, providing necessary land for first and the experiment. If you start doing it, and many cases are coming on forward, then you'll find the appropriate value for the land, the local people, they may be acceptable, and then maybe benefit can be shared later on. Yeah, the only with the success. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Another key concept discussed was marketing assessments for SEZs. Identifying the market problem in SEZs is necessary for development.
And it's not only about incentives on the other side, because this can create a not alignment between domestic and the export. So you need to take into consideration that you are addressing which market failure with the special economic zones. That means, are you looking at a problem of infrastructures? Are you looking at the problem about the land availability? So which problem are you looking at? And this is something that has to be solved, and then has to be developed consistently the program of the government that wants to give space to a specific sector. And then looking with the operator in that sector, if there is a financial sense to have a specific zones that can operate in a regime that allows to support the fact that there are no infrastructure that can support that specific sector, and so forth. So there should be a business model behind that. And then you can build above, upon that. So it's always a matter of looking at the marketing assessment that you do, the business model, and then you see how you can finance it, and then there is the scheme of the PPP or whatsoever. But behind all that, there should be a IRR that makes sense. And this is what you have to do first when you look at the special economic zones. I've heard that there's some zones that will be developed in rural areas. Why? Which is the market failure that you want to address there? So this is the question that you have to think about. And then it's possible that some zones will not be good and some will be very effective. So this will be discussed with the private sector that have to give you the idea about which is good and which is not for that specific sector.
The second day of the summit saw discussions on the SEZ policy and master plan. And the afternoon session saw invited guest speakers, which are the enablers of SEZs in the country. Topics discussed were on the application of SEZ license, energy solutions, customary land mobilization, law and order, port solution, connect PNG or road connectivity, telecommunication solutions, and state equity funding. On the telecommunications sector, PNG-owned telecommunications company Telecom Limited CEO Amos Tepi spoke on how telecom's input plays a vital role in SEZs. CEO Tepi firstly emphasized that as enablers of SEZs, there must be a conducive environment. Tepi also had the opportunity to mention Telecom's partnership agreement with the Paga Hill development, which is the potential SEZ in the capital city of Papua New Guinea.
And also Telecom, I want to make it clear that we also signed our partnership or MOU with Paga Hill development. Exclusively, we've done that agreement, and we're given right for Paga Hill development to progress. Provisions of internet, telephony voice, data services in SEZ and extended to international partners, also Telecom is there to provide that.
The two-day summit was a success. Minister Maru summed up the summit with this.
SEZ is not something you drive politically. It must be demand-led. There must be a demand for the goods and services. There must be an investor who's willing to come. You create the environment, provide the enablers, and the investor comes. The study must be done first, not later. You must determine that it's viable. You have a business case, then you start talking about investment and planning and putting in a sequence of steps what you must do from A to Z to get that SEZ to work. Clearly, SEZ can be mainly driven by the private sector, but in our context, district and provinces, you have to be the major driver of this.
And that's all the time we have for you on this episode of A Closer Look. Please do join us same time next week for another episode. Until then, pleasant viewing. Good night.